I'd like to invite my panelists to come and sit down. We have Robin Hodess, the Chief Executive of GRI, Chiara Del Prete, the Chair of EFRAG, the Sustainability Reporting Technical Group, and Tim Lambert, Country Head for UKI and Nordics of Osapiens. So thank you very much. Chiara, the last time we met, we hosted a session together 2 years ago, if you remember, which was the 9th Sustainability Week in 2024. And that was just before ESRS was due to take off. It was standing room only. I felt like we were looking into a room of sustainability professionals that had a look of, a palpable sense of fear. And a couple of smug people at the back who thought that they had their 1,200 indicators sorted out. Things have obviously changed. So in 2025, the omnibus was brought into place, and some of the organisations, such as ours, fell then out of the reporting requirements. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the companies that would have been due to report to ESRS are welcoming that respite? Or do you think they're going to continue as planned and continue trying to strive for reporting?
Well, I think that group is very diversified, very big group of companies. There has been a massive descoping. So certainly we cannot look at that as a unique group. Companies that were more advanced in the curve are likely to continue and to leverage on the investments that they have done, but many are relieved from the simplification.
But those that are seeking to report to ESRS, do you find that it's driving value? I mean, and how is it driving value for the organisations?
Well, certainly, these type of transition projects are multi-annual. So also those that were in scope and remain in scope, they had a first year focusing on compliance and readiness, and multi-annual programs to get to business as usual. 2025 reports are still under the full standards, so before simplification. But I think a lot of the thinking behind our simplification drives already a focus on more strategic thinking, but not entirely, of course, because you cannot still apply entirely the simplified standard. So I see this year as a transition period, and more interesting things will come in the future.
And of course, it's mandatory. It's something that companies actually, they have to do it. It's law for those companies that fall under this guidance. But to the points that were being raised before and speaking to the CFO and supporting the sustainability function, what role do you think it plays in that?
Well, certainly there are many things in the exercise where you can get value. The simplification work gave us the valuable opportunity to speak to hundreds of companies. And we understood that those experiences were also confirming the benefits and the value. Take the example of the double materiality, which forces you to look more far into the future toward sustainable growth and value. And also the double materiality exercise itself, the assessment, brings together different departments or areas of the companies and bridge the gap between those different elements and bring the topics more higher in the agenda of the boards effectively. Now, of course, the simplified standards emphasize even more the strategic dimension of all of this.
So, Robin, turning to you, double materiality is not a new topic. That's something that the GRI covered, and the GRI has been around for decades. You were started off in 1997, around the time of the Kyoto Protocol, and 10,000 or many thousands of companies report to you on a global basis. How do you, if you look at the development of the CSRD, which is now the most comprehensive mandatory reporting regime today, do you think that the GRI provided a kind of conveyor belt process for that? It was one of the first voluntary standards. It's very well established. Do you think that helped open the door to this type of legal implementation?
Yes, we're almost 30, so we've got the child out of the house and hopefully in their first flat. I think the important thing for GRI was that so much of the learning that companies did with voluntary standards, and we call them voluntary standards because companies do materiality assessment and try to establish what their most significant impacts are and report on those. But actually, GRI is referenced and embedded in 200 some pieces of legislation and referencing and stock markets around the world. But nevertheless, a largely voluntary scheme that grew over this whole growth period. And as you say, is now in its third decade. But we saw so much of what was in GRI adopted into the ESRS. So we really felt like for our mission, which is to focus on reporting on impacts, this was a huge success story. And we worked together with EFRAG on interoperability and really tried to make sure that we could show that where GRI was used globally, it was a great baseline for doing reporting in Europe. And particularly the retention of double materiality through the omnibus was especially important for us, since our focus is on the impact side of reporting.
Because you've been around for such a long time and have these 14,000 companies reporting to you, you maybe have some examples of how double materiality is played out for those organizations. What value have you seen it driving for the companies that have chosen to report to GRI voluntarily? Do you have examples you can share?
Sure. I mean, I think we've just been hearing how we are focusing more on the strategic aspect of reporting and how it needs to be built into longer-term business strategies. So there's companies like CDL, which is a real estate company based in Singapore, operating in 20-something countries. CDL's included nature reporting in their sustainability reports for a while. It's allowed them to mitigate risk in local development projects. It's also given them access to green finance. So there's so many benefits when companies can follow a scheme like GRI and really show that their data has value for themselves, for the changes they need to mitigate and prepare for the future, but also for investors.
And maybe just one final question. I mean, what would you recommend to companies, I mean, like our own organization, where we would have fallen into the ESRS reporting, but now don't necessarily need to do that? Would your recommendation be to, report to GRI? That's a good foundation. I mean, what would you say?
Well, we do hear about companies that are sort of going back to roots and picking up GRI again, even in the European setting, because there's this huge gap. We've had this de-scoping that Chiara referred to. I think there's a space there for working with companies and making sure they're on their pathway to European reporting, but GRI obviously offers a voluntary scheme approach. And there are actually elements that have fallen out of the ESRS with the simplification where GRI still makes an offering. So for example, sector standards, that's an approach we can have. So that's one way and a step-in role for companies.
And one final point before I turn to Tim. You said companies are picking up, they're picking up GRI again. Do you find that they're putting it down? Because they don't want to be reporting to everything and they're like, let's just simplify and we'll do one thing instead.
We expect numbers to fall in Europe because obviously it's a mandated market. But again, for us, it's very important that the DNA of GRI and what we do is embedded in the ESRS. So actually for us, it's not really only about our numbers. It's about numbers of jurisdictions that include sustainability reporting that focuses on impact. So we see for lots and lots of places around the world, from Brazil to China, introducing sustainability standards that include impact reporting. And that's where we're trying to influence and really look at GRI together with ISSB as two sides of a coin and providing a gold standard for the world's sustainability reporting.
Okay, we'll come back to interoperability in a minute. So Tim, turning to you, Osapiens helps companies make this fairly complex regulatory landscape simple. I mean, that's my words, probably not yours. But if you think about all of the MNCs that you're working with, and you were probably working together with them when ESRS was in 2024 when we were looking at the first iteration of it, do you feel a bit like a counsellor where you've gone through the peaks and the troughs and you've helped them through to the other side? I mean, how's that played out?
Oh, I think it's definitely been a journey. I think where we seek to play is to help. Perhaps one of the reasons we've been able to help is because we're able to stay nimble and fast and dynamic within our platform, so that the framework is there for people, so that they can quickly get to where they need to with their reporting capabilities.
So does that mean you've just kind of moved as they've moved?
Yeah, we've had to stay on the inflection of what happens, but I think on the other side of that, whatever amount of effort and input there's happened, there's a lot of value beyond the initial reporting process that they've now achieved, many of them. On the other side, the kind of business insights, I think it was alluded to in the previous session, but the insights you can get from the dynamic sustainability data that you're creating helps with business decisions, from risk to procurement, to your supply chains, to capital allocation. So there's a huge amount of value that the regulations have sort of accelerated people to, but also in terms of, we didn't touch on it before, but business valuation and things like this, people that have got a proper sustainability program in place, whether that's, a GRI, ISSB, ESRS, or voluntary, are a more attractive prospect within the market than those that haven't taken it.
That's really interesting, because it would pick up on the points that Robin and Chiara have both been making, that even though companies have fallen by the wayside in terms of whether they're in the reporting bucket or not, they're still picking things up and still actually seeing value in the data that they're collecting. So you're not seeing them saying, well, thanks very much, we're just going to wait until
I think
it applies to us.
It's almost the opposite. Those that have taken action and got into that status are now able to demonstrate, interesting to the previous session, demonstrate the positive impact of what they're doing through the data. Obviously, data fragmentation is still a challenge for many businesses, or those that have the data now applying it. But the whole point of having a system like an operational layer for non-financial data, which is what we essentially provide, means that you can make those business decisions like an operational performance decisions and demonstrate what you're doing at a level that is understandable at C-suite. So it's beyond the CSO, it's the other business stakeholders, the collaboration that you talked about at DMA, and that's in a language, and those are projects that you can then point to the value of the decarbonization within a product, the value of switching dynamically a supplier before the risk that you've identified becomes an impact. So there's so much value in the exercise itself, number one, and then beyond that, and that's what we're seeing with our customer base.
So do you see, there's a question there on capital allocation. I mean, do you actually have your customers coming to you and saying that we need to collect this data? We've got questions from investors. They need to have trust in the kind of reporting that we're doing before they'll support us with this. Is that a kind of question you're seeing?
Yeah, there's processes that people go through depending on whether they're, maybe pre-IPO or whatever the status of their company is, and they need almost like a framework and a data set that is reliable. And once they have that set up, then they can what's the word? They can demonstrate the value of their business through that route.
So maybe coming back to the interoperability question, because I'm sure that this is something that you see at the coalface. You have all of these regulations. You're helping organisations to report to each of them. If you were to point out some of the things that you feel don't work or haven't worked with interoperability, what would those be?
That's a good question. So in terms of, is there true interoperability in every case today across all the different impact regulations that you have to work on? So, for example, I'll use an example. We support a lot of businesses with the deforestation-free regulation. I know that's a little bit separate to the reporting side, but nonetheless, it was a huge undertaking. And there's an adjacency to a lot of the product compliance regulations that are coming So packaging waste, and there's a lot of reusable data. So I think what we're finding is that if you do it once really well and you get the right data in the right form, then you can apply it broadly. There's a level of interoperability that needs to catch up, but that's the core of kind of our platform, for example. That's the holy grail that we're aiming for, is complete operability between all the different regulations.
And coming back to you both, Chiara and Robin, I remember, Chiara, when our last conversation, we sat down with Richard Barker from the IFRS.
Yes.
And there was a conversation that we had in the panel on double materiality and financial materiality, and that they're two different concepts, and that in itself was quite challenging for the sustainability function. Did you approach that differently with GRI, or how were you working together? Can you both share a bit about how that functioned?
Well, we endeavored to get the same definitions with GRI, because we were committed to give to companies the possibility to leverage on all the knowledge, on the work done in the past. So we see the results of their GRI materiality assessment completely pertinent also for ESRS.
And Robin, how would you see that from your perspective? Do you feel that there's been a good cooperation between the two standards, and that you work together well on that front?
As I said, I think we saw it as a real story of success for what we stand for, that the ESRS was so robust. And I think in the simplification process, the definitions around materiality have even gotten closer. So there's been some opportunity for improvement even through that. And with the IFRS Foundation, with ISSB, I think it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate complementarity. We are looking at different elements. GRI never focused on financial materiality. We did focus on reporting that reflected impacts. But now with the two systems in place, also reflected inside Europe, we have an ambitious sort of full program that corporates can work with, and they complement, they don't overlap. Where they do overlap, we're making every effort to define and set common disclosures. We have a good example last year. We revised our climate standard, and you'll know that the ISSB has S1, the general standard, and then the climate standard is S2. And within those, both their climate standard and ours look at GHG. And we recognize ISSB reporting as relevant and the same as what's required in our standard. So you have one and done. And I think that's really important for the market and for reporters, that we are trying to look at any kind of overlap and reduce burden and make sure that it's not just interoperable, but it's actually a common standard.
So what does that look like in practice? Because I've spoken to a couple of CSOs over the past couple of days who are very happy that their annual reports are coming out, or the sustainability reporting's coming out tomorrow, and they can, put it aside for the year. How does that actually look like? Are you using cross-referencing? You report to one and not to the other? I mean, how does, from a practical perspective, how are you removing the burden?
Well, again, by identifying that, we account for future reporting, because ISSB reporting is just starting right now. So we'll have to see how it rolls out in practice. But I think that what we're trying to show is the direction of travel, that we recognize that there's a strong perception that there's more to do, and that the CSO's valuable time needs to be spent not only on gathering data, because that's so important for decision making, but also on the actions that follow up on the data and making it meaningful internally. That's absolutely critical to create that sort of flow and cycle of good work that's needed. But I think what we want to show is that over time, the two biggest and most important sustainability standard setters at the global level are cooperating. We've got a great opportunity this year. ISSB is now working on nature standards that will be released in time for the Nature COP. We have a biodiversity standard. So you mentioned forests. And this is all going to reflect the good work that was done by the TNFD, which set a great framework around nature and biodiversity. So let's make sure we're going to the market with something really clear on what's forward-looking on biodiversity come later this year. That's a good opportunity for interoperability and convergence in practice.
Do we have any questions from the floor? This is your opportunity to ask. I'm sure we have several people that are reporting to these frameworks. Yes, the lady here down at the front. And if you could say your name and who you're working for, please.
I'm Isabel Devan. I confess to be working for the Carbon Trust. So obviously we love the idea that we have to report on data and all of that. But as we've just heard, some of this data has become almost counterproductive. The amount of it, the volume of it, the need to improve it constantly. What's actually being done to kind of standardize, perhaps simplify, not oversimplify, but simplify the multiple types of standards and frameworks that are actually present in the market now, so that Chief Sustainability Officers can talk to to the CFOs in a better way going forward?
Chiara?
Well, I would say this is what we have been working for since the beginning of the standard setting exercise. The IFRS and EFRAG started at the same time. But we leveraged on common disclosures. If you look at our interoperability map, you see that except few differences, we have an aligned language, we have an aligned data, and it's the same also for GRI. If I may add on simplification and the way we've approached the exercise is to move from a rule-based, very detailed checklist approach, mainly for narrative disclosure, to something that allows companies to exercise more judgment and to tell their story while keeping the disclosures objectives aligned. So that's the key for the simplification exercise that we have achieved. And as you know, 60-70% of the information is of a narrative nature, and figures alone are not capable of telling really the story of the company. So I think that is the key. And of course, this makes much more sense now that we have companies, bigger companies remaining in the scope, which are those that are more used to the exercise of the judgment and to tell their stories.
Any other questions from the floor? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Tim another question on that. There's one at the back, if you could get a microphone there, please. Whether you think that companies that are doing a good job of this, Tim, that the market's actually rewarding them for that. Are you seeing that?
In terms of those that are
doing well, that their companies are succeeding, they're able to place their products, and not just capital allocation, but do you see that the market's rewarding them for that they're using the data in a way that's getting them?
Absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, we see customers who are having very positive business impact way beyond the initial scope of why they had to do the reporting. Maybe in the beginning it was because they had to, but then on the other side, again, it comes to having, I think, a kind of a unified backbone for non-financial data, which is reusable across multiple use cases. Certainly, that was our vision, and it seems to be playing through. But it goes back to bridging the gap between, I think, the session before between CSO and CFO. This enables. I think I'm a simple guy, so Pareto's law, 80-20. We want the CSOs to be able to invest 80% of their time on the top 20% of the most valuable activities that they do, whilst able to articulate the business value of what they're doing, right? And this is something that's ubiquitously understandable when you have that kind of...
yeah, that sounds like a good use of time.
Yeah.
So the question at the back, please.
Thank you. I'm Sebastian with NatCap. We're a nature intelligence company, so very familiar with the types of frameworks we've been discussing. When we're working with our clients, and particularly sustainability leaders, they're often being asked by the CFO to prove the business value of aligning with the types of frameworks we've been discussing, particularly when they're not mandatory. So I was curious if any of the panelists had come across particularly good case studies of companies that have unlocked value for their business from aligning with the types of frameworks we've been discussing.
Robin, do you want to take that?
Well, I mentioned CDL before, and I've got some case studies I'm happy to share with you after that really focus on our biodiversity standard and its use and its value to companies. We also have companies that we've seen have integrated their sustainability reporting into their strategy and have been able to really commit to and reach their renewable energy goals, which has been of huge value to them in the market. So there's a lot of cases and examples, I think, of data being used not only by the companies, but also then being referenced and asked for by investors. So we have a sort of a positive race to the top there.
Yep, Chiara.
Yeah, if I may add, we as standard setters now, we have a huge opportunity, but also challenge, which is to serve this very big market under a voluntary system. One of the key players there are the lenders and investors, and the EBA ESG guidelines are into effect this year, and basically they will more and more ask or force banks to look at the integration of the ESG data into their creditworthiness assessment. So I think that is an angle where companies should be, at least in Europe, it is expected to play a role. Our voluntary standard, which has been designed for the small, medium enterprises, is now identified as the standard also for the larger. We are in the camp of the voluntary standards, so you could also think, and we hope, of looking at our standards, full standards that are now simplified to complement what is not included in the voluntary standard.
Great. I think that brings our panel to a close. We're out of time. So the Jedi Knights sounds like if we focus on 20% of the business, or 20%, we're going to get 80% of the value. It sounds like a good proposition. Thank you very much to my panelists for this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hand a round of applause. Thank you.